As I observe how the American people react to infringements on their rights, I often wonder why they simply sit by and accept it. Then I ask myself, are the American people suffering from Stockholm Syndrome? We'll ponder that next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there once again, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution and we teach the rising generation to be free. I'm glad you could join me. As always, please head to that website, constitutionstudy.com. Check out the article, check out the videos, share them with others, please. That's one of the best things you can do, is share this information with others. Yes, you can ask a question. Yes, you can see where I'm speaking. Yes, you can go to the store. But most of all, it's sharing this information. Help educate your neighbors. Teach the rising generation to be free. Help people know their rights and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. That's what John Jay said we should do. It's up to us to do it, because certainly not the government that's going to do it. And if you have any ideas or suggestions, please put them on the website as well. I'm always looking for a good idea. With that, let's contemplate this idea of the Stockholm Syndrome. From the Encyclopedia Britannicum, Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological response wherein a captive begins to identify closely with his or her captors, as well as their agenda and demands. So what does this have to do with the apparent willingness of the American people to bow to the will of those in government, even in the face of evidence that the power they are wielding is illegal? I believe the American people have been held in captivity so long, many, in fact most, well, they have no idea what real liberty is. Look at some of my recent episodes. During the riots, I've seen people claim that looters have the right to do so, while others claim that even suggesting that someone stand up to the police is reason enough for arrest. We have a court system that repeatedly shows that it either has no clue what the Constitution says or blatantly unwilling to apply the supreme law of the land as it is written. And the people do nothing. Those same courts expend huge amounts of time, effort, and money debating what their predecessors meant, yet cannot apply the simple language of the law to their opinions. They place their opinions above the law, while millions of Americans all but genuflect to those opinions. We see Americans calling for governments to stifle speech, place restrictions on the press, take control of your children, and in countless ways infringe on our unalienable rights. What could explain a country that once followed the words, "Give me liberty or give me death," now begging for their liberties to be taken away from them? Why else would we the people be willing to allow their servants in government to rule them like masters? What has become of those who once repeated the phrase, "I may vehemently disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it"? How could a people, once the bastion of freedom and liberty in the world, fall to the level of serfdom and wait on their governments to take care of them? To me, it seems the most logical explanation is Stockholm Syndrome. We've been held captive so long, we not only identify with our captors, but we support their agenda and their demands. How have we been held captive? By an education system that teaches our children to be obedient rather than rational, to do what they're told rather than what is right, that the power resides in the government, not in the people. An education system that fails to teach the restrictions on government and instead teaches about restrictions on the people. By a political system dominated, controlled, and corrupted by a party system bent on power and control rather than justice and protecting rights. By those in government willing to exercise power and punish those who disagree. And by those who have refused in the past to stand up to such tyranny. And by our own complacency. Our willingness to give up our rights in exchange for a few gifts, a few goodies from government. Our willingness to sell our liberty and the liberty of our children in exchange for government checks and services. And by the millions who have stood by and watched while the rights of others were infringed upon and did absolutely nothing. As Martin Niemöller said in his poem, "When they finally came for me, there was no one left to protect me." We, the people of the United States, have allowed this to happen to ourselves. We are the architects of our own destruction. And as we watch our rights be washed away, we have no one to blame but ourselves. As Malcolm Muggeridge said, quote, "Thus did Western man decide to abolish himself, creating his own boredom out of his own affluence, his own vulnerability out of his own strength, his own impotence out of his own erotomania, himself blowing the trumpet that brought the walls of his own city tumbling down, and having convinced himself that he was too numerous, labored with pill and scalpel and syringe to make himself fewer, until at last, having educated himself into imbecility and polluted and drugged himself into stupefaction, he keeled over, a weary, battered old brontosaurus, and became extinct." So what will the American people do? Will we keel over and become extinct? Will we walk away from liberty either because we thought it would be hard or it might be dangerous? Will we give up our essential liberties for a promise of temporary security? What will it take for Americans to rally once again to the cause of liberty? Who will issue the call to wake up and gather the few who are still dedicated to liberty? Will those few be willing to spread that call, to show that though the fight may be long and hard, and some of us may pay a very high price, that we value our liberty enough to pay it? Who will cry, "Give me liberty or give me death"? Who will stand across the battlefield of ideas and cry, "This far and no farther"? I stand here. I stand against the tyranny and usurpation of those in power, be they in government or in society. I cry, "This far and no farther." You cannot have my rights. I will not bow to your tyranny. And as I stand, a small voice crying for liberty, will you join me? Will you recognize the truth of the words in the Declaration of Independence? But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evidences a design to reduce them to absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Who will stand with me to confront the demands of those who will take our liberties? Who will push back against those who usurp our rights and show that their goal is despotism over the people? To fight them, not with guns, but with ideas. To fight at the ballot box so that our children will not have to fight on the battlefield. To secure the blessings of liberty, not just for ourselves, but for our posterity. I call you to action, and I do so with the words of Captain John Parker. Stand your ground. Do not fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have war, let it begin here. Will you stand with me? The idea of the Stockholm Syndrome came to me a few weeks ago, and it took me a while to ponder my way through, until I realized that most of the arguments I deal with in social media, in the media, and in questions on the website come from a people who are hedged in with this idea that they've been taught by the government that the government has all the power, that you can't stand against the government, that you can't stand against City Hall. But that's not true. We've been educated into imbecility. We don't know what our rights are. We don't know how the government is structured. We don't know our power over it. Sometimes I feel like a lone voice crying for liberty. And every once in a while, I'll find somebody who will come alongside and stand with me. The question is, are you one of them? Do you want to live in a free country? Do you want your children to grow up in a free country? Look at what's happened in the States over the last few weeks and ask yourself, is that the country you want your children living in? One where a single person, by dictate, can order them locked up, impounded into their own home, their property taken, their ability to make a living taken, their ability to worship taken? Is that the world you want to live in? Do you want to live in a world where riots are allowed to go unchecked because people in government are afraid someone might get hurt while people are getting hurt? That have the twisted idea that if you let criminals run rampant, they'll somehow stop? Is that the land you want to live in? See, the interesting thing about the Stockholm Syndrome is it's a mental issue, not a physical one. It's a mental restraint, not a physical one. And in America, the restraints on liberty are predominantly mental. Oh yeah, you might get a ticket, you might get arrested, you might go to jail. But the question is, what's more important to you? The liberty of you and your family, or a few nights in jail? Patrick Henry said, give me liberty or give me death. I'm not asking for you to die for it. I'm just asking you to be inconvenienced for it. Will you? Will you stand up to tyranny? Will you stand up to injustice? Will you stand up to those who are infringing on the rights of others? Will you stand and say, this far, no farther? Will we stand our ground? Now, I'm not talking about being like the rioters and the looters. We're not going to fire unless fired upon. We will defend ourselves, but we will not instigate violence. But will we stop running away from a feckless government? When will we realize that we outnumber them? Based on some of the numbers, the armed citizenry outnumbers the military about 50-1. Now, I don't want it to come to gunfire. I want to do this at the ballot box. But we're never going to get people over the mental hurdle of voting for people based on their constitutional standards rather than welfare checks and services until we break the mental lock, that Stockholm Syndrome that says government is there to provide for you. Government is there to protect you. Our government was not put in place to provide for us or to protect us. It was put in place to protect our rights. If you head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com, you'll find out more about the work that we're doing. But if I struck a chord with you, if you're willing to stand with me, or at least listen to what I have to say, well, I hope you'll join me on the website, on the social media, and next time right here on the Constitution Study.